Hey, good morning, good afternoon to all you guys out there. This is T. Scott Randall coming to you from Seminole, Florida. I want to talk to you today about the Army Body Composition Program and how that affects its soldiers and how really the Army views obesity in general. So I've titled my presentation The Army Body Composition Program: Producing a Healthy Soldier, or Embodied Epideictic. So the background of this presentation is that if you're overweight in the Army, you can be discharged. That is a valid reason for discharge. So why is that so important to the Army that they would kick people out for it? Well, my thesis is that the Army is rhetorically constructing obesity as the embodiment of indiscipline. It is a physical manifestation of someone who does not have the will to be in the Army and should not be there. All right, so where am I coming from? The Army body composition program starts with a weigh-in. So each soldier, twice a year if you're active duty, once a year if you're in the reserve, you get weighed. So the first step is you get on a scale and they give you your number. Well, here is the screening table weight for every soldier by gender in the Army. So here it is. So you just simply look at how tall you are and how much you weigh, and you see if you're obese. Simple enough. Well, if you are above the screening maximum table weight, then they actually do something they call the tape test, and that provides the body fat percentage that the Army's going to go with from that point forward. So when you go through the tape test, for males, they're going to tape your neck and your stomach and get the circumference of both of those. They put it into a calculation, and that gives you your body fat when you also put in your age and your height. For females, they measure your chest, circumference of the chest, and the circumference of the buttocks. And again, they also put in your height and your age. And this is the chart. So if you are a male, let's say over 40, like me, you can only be 26% body fat. Anything above that, you are considered obese by the Army. So what happens if you're obese? Then they enroll you in the Army Body Composition Program, which means that you are weighed in every month. You must lose 3 to 8 pounds per month. If you fall outside of that, do not make satisfactory progress, you can be discharged from the Army. All right, that's our background. It's our roadmap. We're going to go over literature associated with obesity, looking at really fat studies as a subgenre of disability studies. And then we're going to look at patient noncompliance, and then we'll look at Karen Barad's ideas. So this is a roadmap really for the literature review, and then we'll go into the analysis and then the findings and conclusions. So what is fat studies? Well, it's a sub area that I argue is really part of disability studies, that they look at issues associated with obesity. So some of the common stereotypes they've identified is if you're obese, you're lazy, you're gluttonous, greedy, you're uncontrolled, lazy. That's going to be a really big one. You lack self-discipline. Obviously, that's a big one for the Army. Then you also sort of sprinkle in this idea of the obesity epidemic that we've seen in the last couple decades, and now you associate obesity with dangerousness for the continued growth of society itself. So for disability studies in general, and I'm going to mix in obesity with this, oftentimes someone with a disability or a condition like obesity, that's just shorthand for you not being able to meet the standard, not being able to meet the norm. You are unfit. And so for a theorist like Campbell, you really have two essential elements to ableism or the discriminatory ism associated with disability. You have to have what is the norm. You have to have a notion of the norm. So what do you consider to be average? And then you have to have a mechanism of enforcing the difference between the norm and the abnormal or aberrant. And so you have those two elements, then you're going to have ableism in your society. And we're going to see the Army fits exactly into that model with its body composition program. Another issue with disability studies is the dichotomy between a medical model of disability and a social model. So with a medical model, that's what you would look at and say, okay, so that person is unable to walk. So you are disabled because you are unable to walk. Well, okay, disability scholars would say, well, let's not so fast. We really think there's a difference between an impairment and a disability. So an impairment could be the inability to walk. A physical impairment could be a mental impairment. So I'm unable to walk, but that is only disabling if the environment, if society doesn't structure itself in a way where I can function. So the disability is really located outside the individual and in the physical environment. So from fat studies, the overwhelming reason given by people who view obese people with sort of a discriminatory animus is that obesity is within that person's control. And we're going to see that as just critical to the Army's view as well. And it's a view that is so common sense, is so accepted that there really isn't any necessary reason to justify it, to give some sort of factual basis for it. It's just reality. And so if you hold that view that it's within their control, then compliance becomes an issue, because when a soldier goes into the Army body composition program, they're given nutrition counseling and they're given guidance that, look, you got to lose so much weight per month or you're going to be kicked out of the Army. And so why doesn't that work every time? Well, the issue comes up with compliance, and why isn't that person controlling oneself? And so from the Army's perspective, they're like, look, we're trying to help people, we're trying to help them really save themselves, right? We're interjecting in there to help them. But folks like Judy Siegel are out there that say, look, patient compliance, it's not some mechanistic thing out there. It's a complex theory of human persuasion and judgment. This is a rhetorical issue. How are you constructing this in a manner that someone can comply? Are you looking at them as an individual, as a person, as a unique unit? If you're not, then that's probably, some of the reasons your program doesn't work. And so the failure to comply, that's a rhetorical failure. And so obesity as a condition can be looked at as an embodiment of noncompliance with the Army body composition program. But why is it that way? Why can't they get compliance out there? And Judy Siegel would say, because you're not treating that person as an individual with individual histories, etc. And we'll get into that more. So taking it a step further, so you have this deficit model of communication, where if that person, like if you're coming from the expert point of view, like the Army, then someone's non-compliance, it's not because what I'm putting out is wrong. It's because that person is deciding based on incorrect information or just obstinate. All right. And you can see that in, like, if you had an expert telling you how to control, let's say, weeds in your backyard, and you don't do it. Well, the expert's like, it's not my fault, I'm telling you. But what you're telling them isn't working because there's more weeds, right? And so the deficit model, it really speaks to this reliance on an individual receiving information as being able to make rational decisions. They're having this heightened sense of agency. And as stated by Gouge, he says noncompliance is caused by the passivity and other weaknesses of the individual. So you're looking at the problem in the individual, not in the expert putting out the information. And that goes along really well with compliance theory and what the institution or the expert, what their point of view is in seeing obesity as a problem in a to get someone to do what you want them to do. Karen Barad, she said that, hey, look, agency is a lot more complex than that. Agency really doesn't even exist in the individual. She says that, look, agency is something that is a phenomenon that occurs from this interaction of multiple things occurring at one time. It's taken into account the measurement device, how you're observing the person's history, the person's point of view. All these things go into a mix where she says the outcome is reality, right? So reality is a material discursive phenomenon, and it does not exist prior to signification, meaning that person is not obese prior to you measuring them as obese. And that you have to think about that. But there's a lot of stuff that goes into the history of the Army, the culture, and everything that goes into them having a sergeant then take a tape out and measure a soldier. And then for that soldier then to be what they are, there is a whole history of devices, etc., that comes into play. So this kind of volatile mix becomes this complex phenomenon. Well, if you're the Army and you're looking at patient compliance, you're looking at deficit model, you're trying to figure out why this person is the way they are, knowing the high stakes. And the answer is, from Karen Barad, is the agency does not exist in the individual, but it exists in this phenomenon, this interplay. And so it's difficult to put blame, if you will, on an individual when there's an entire complexity going on at that moment of being measured as obese. So the methods that I'm going to be going over for the study, it's basically rhetorical criticism. And so we're using that as a method, essentially close reading of a text. The methodology is going to be disability studies with a sprinkling of fat studies inside there. So that's going to be the way that I view how the research should proceed, etc. Findings and analysis. Here we go. So according to Army Regulation 600-9, the primary objective of the body fat control program is to ensure soldiers achieve and maintain optimal well-being and performance under all conditions. So the Army is assuming an obese soldier is not mentally or emotionally well, right? And that they are a lower performer. So the overall assumption by the Army is that an obese soldier has less than optimal well-being and is a lower performer. And basically, this is a rhetorical move. Why? Because there's nothing objectively real about that. There's no evidence. There's nothing to prove this assumption. So again, it goes back to that common sense notion that if you're obese, then you have to not like that, right? You cannot have optimal well-being or performance. Okay, taking them further. Actually, the regulation gives you the secondary motives of the program. Well, what are those? They are to assist in establishing and maintaining operational readiness, physical fitness, health, and a professional military appearance. So you flip that around, it says, well, the Army views its body composition program as necessary to assist obese soldiers to become, because they're obviously not right now, operationally ready, physically fit, healthy, and to project a military appearance, because an obese soldier obviously is not doing that. This is how the Army constructs obesity. Obesity is a lower state of being for soldiers that harms their well-being and performance, as well as lowers their physical fitness and overall health and creates an unmilitary appearance. So, what does that mean for the Army? Well, it means, okay, so where does that get us? Well, it shows that the Army clearly ascribes to the medical model of obesity, right? So obesity exists in the soldier. It's not something to do with his environment. The soldier has the ability to become not obese. And so the soldier has agency over the condition. And it sends soldiers to a medical screening. Once that screening comes back that you're fine, that there's no condition such as a thyroid or medication causing your obesity, then you, the soldier, have to maintain progress on the body composition program. Any failure of you in doing that can get you removed. That is absolutely all within a traditional view of agency. The person has the ability to do this. And so if you look at Herndl and Zarlingo, the failure to follow the program, it's the soldier's issue. We're giving you the tools. Why aren't you following the advice? Why aren't you doing what you're supposed to do? So you must be obstinate, or you don't care, right? If you take that deficit model, the soldier is looked at as not exercising the proper agency under the circumstances. Obviously, this is not in compliance or does not comport with what Barad would see as agency existing within this phenomenon that's outside the individual. Her analysis obviously is much more complex, and it would tell the Army, look, if you want to keep these soldiers, if that is the goal, then you need to take into account a lot more factors in dealing with the situation and dealing with this discursive phenomenon that we call the obese soldier. And and it takes some self-reflection as well. Where did it lead you to want to even measure this, right? And then how did the soldier get to all these things have to come together if you want to change and actually exercise agency under the circumstances. So you essentially change the phenomenon, then you change the outcome. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please let me know. I look forward to seeing everyone else's presentations. Thanks. Means that so let's talk about person. So here is